I'm trying to flip the tables on the industry because I'm really tired of everybody telling people that they can get a book done in 5 days. I think it's damaging. I think there's a lot of people who believe it and don't understand all the asterisks that come with that, because you could do that, but then all these other things you want aren't going to happen. And I think it's cruel, actually, to take a person's dreams, run them through the McDonald's drive-through, and then tell them, here, you can have the dream now. And I also think that it underestimates people and their abilities. Not everybody has great writing talent, but by focusing on the reader, you can actually write a better book. So it's a way forward. That's why I want to sell, just, sorry for cursing, but an ass ton of books.
Yeah, man. What does it take to put your life's work out there in a really big way? How much can I do with this one precious life? Welcome to The Selfish Gift. Have you heard that saying that the book is the new business card? Well, my guest today is here to argue with you about that. AJ Harper is a developmental editor, a ghostwriter, and a publishing strategist who helps authors to write transformational nonfiction books. She has worked with hundreds of authors, from newbies and first-timers to New York Times bestselling authors with millions of books sold, including one of my favorites, Mike Michalowicz, who's the author of Profit First, which I think every small business owner should read. AJ is also the author of her own nonfiction book, Write, a Must Read, looks like this, which teaches nonfiction book authors how to conceptualize and write a book that will actually make people want to buy it and read it because it can transform their lives. AJ, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm excited to be here and talk with you.
So you and I have the same bee in our bonnet about this phrase, the book is the new business card. Why is that the wrong way to look at the reason for publishing a nonfiction book?
Well, because immediately, right off the bat, you're going to cut a bunch of corners when it comes to writing a book. If it's, a business card is we don't invest a lot into creating a marketing piece, is really what they're saying. And you're not thinking about the reader in that respect. You're just thinking about yourself and what you want to put forward. Also, we toss business cards away. I mean, I probably have suitcases littered with business cards. I can't remember why I collected them or who handed them to me. And ultimately, that's not the function of a book. A nonfiction book, especially prescriptive nonfiction, is to help somebody's life or business or marriage or body or connection with their spirituality, whatever, get better. So we have to be focused on the reader in that respect. And when we say a book is a better business card, we're just focusing on ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I can understand why people have sort of lit upon that as a, compelling reason, because, it does work that way when, an author writes a book that transforms lives. One of the results on their own life is that, it helps them to become better known. It is sort of elevates their credibility and their visibility. And it becomes a sort of like a piece of their thought leadership that they can put into someone's hands and have that person take them home and keep them in a special place. But that is not the reason. And it's not anywhere near enough of a reason to write a book if your aim is really to help people, to transform people's lives, or to write a book that has any kind of shelf life. In fact, I've heard some of the self-publishing hucksters on the internet say things like, you don't have to be an expert to add value, or even that like writing a book is what makes you an expert. And I'm like, no.
No. The thing also about it is that any book will elevate you. That's all true. That's not false information. But it's not going to do the job you want it to do if it's not an excellent book that delivers. So, you still need to write a great book. There's no shortcut.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I think that in the earlier stages of when self-publishing was becoming a thing, people were just so impressed by the fact that, like, ooh, author, and, you have your your thumbnail near your email signature, the thumbnail cover of your book cover. But I feel like there's been so much mediocre work produced in that space that some of the luster is gone from that. And really, if you want that book to actually, as well as helping other people, if you really want it to serve your own career in a substantial way, it can't be a throwaway piece of content.
No. I mean, it comes down to just, are people talking about your book because it was helpful to them?
Mm-hmm.
It's really that. And
are they talking about it at all?
Yeah, but that's why they will. If it's prescriptive nonfiction, if it helps a person shift their perspective or make some sort of change, they will talk about it. And, people talk about books all the time, even though they haven't read them. They'll say, oh, yeah, that's a great book, but they really haven't read it yet. They're just co-signing on, what's going on in their industry or their circle. But when a person really is moved by a book and it helps them in some way, they will talk about it in a heartfelt way. Oh my gosh, this book was so helpful. You really need this book. I wish everybody would read this book. That's next level thought leadership. And that takes people where they really want to go when they start doing a book.
Absolutely. So in this conversation, we're going to drill into your body of work and your methodology in which you help other authors, avoid that pitfall of mediocrity. And then we're also going to talk about, your own book and what that was like to write. But let's start with the first piece first. Tell us a little bit about the various ways in which you serve authors. So I'm thinking about, aside from your book, what other products and services have you got going for authors?
It's actually pretty simple. The main thing I do is every year I teach 2 14-week workshops for 15 people at a time. So I take 30 new students a year and I take them through my whole process and serve as a developmental editor during that time. And then they become part of my community and we continue to serve them on an ongoing basis. That's the main thing I do. And I keep it really, really small.
And that's called the Top 3 Book Workshop.
Yeah, it's called Top 3 because I wanted it to be, I wanted people to reach for, I want my book to be one of those 3 books that are sitting on the nightstand. Initially, I thought desert island, what would you bring to a desert island? But there's already a desert island book something out there in the world. So I settled on Top 3 because, one of my friends in business and in life, Michael Port, said to me, why isn't it a number 1 or, the one, not top 3? Well, because I believe that people have multiple books on their list of faves, and it's, that's enough to get to be one of your top 3 business books, top 3 books on relationships.
Yeah.
That's the goal. So let's try and reach that goal instead of the better business card goal. That was the name, the reason for the name. I also teach an editing workshop that's specifically for folks who have a certain number of chapters done and walk them through my methodology that I teach in the book. And
is the editing workshop, do you mean, that's not a workshop for professional editors? It's a like a self-editing workshop or revision workshop for authors.
So, and I know, since we're in the same role basically and doing the same things, that, if a person self-publishes, they're not, unless they hire a developmental editor, they're not getting the high level editing support that they need.
Yeah.
And so I teach in my book the exact process I developed when I was a ghostwriter and that I teach in my class so that folks can really do proper self-editing. And even if they do have a developmental editor with either they've hired one or they've gone the traditional or hybrid path, it helps them go into that developmental editing process with their editor stronger, more confident, knowing exactly what they want to do, and having worked out a lot of the kinks in advance, which editors love because then they can really help, because they're not doing so much cleanup. It's like if you watch the renovation shows on HGTV, you do your own demo, basically. Like, don't ask your editor to come in and do demo and all the other tasks.
I mean, they can. It'll just take twice as long and cost 4 times as much.
Yes. And then that authors who are new, that's so nerve-wracking, the editorial process. And if they handle a bunch of it by answering the questions only they can answer in advance, it also will help them just have a better experience. So in the end, there's a better book. So
I love that. I should send a bunch of our authors to your editing workshop, or send people your way, because it's really important. It's hard to be objective about your own material, and especially if you're not used to that, if you're not used to looking at your writing and critiquing it, I mean, with the eye of a professional. How can you, if that's not, where you have built your expertise? But I find that authors there's a spectrum between those that just want to be super fluid and pure and organic about it, and like, I don't know, this is just what wants to come through me. And then those that are extremely sort of top down planners first, and might find it harder to access that spark of creativity or spontaneity. But there is a place in the middle where the best work gets done, where you can access your bursts of insight, but also evaluate them and question them and say, how can I employ this in this work? Does it even belong in this work?
Yeah. And that's all really important. And I think a lot of authors haven't even considered some of the questions the editors ask them. So it's a good idea to do that, as much heavy lifting as you can. And then for people who are going in traditional route, there's so much anxiety about presenting to the editor and then discussing the changes with the editor. And this really helps build confidence so that you can have those conversations and you don't feel like the editor is just mandating changes. So I think it's helpful to have a process before you deliver.
Definitely. And I know that, I mean, in some traditional houses, depending on the size of the house and also the stature of that particular author within the roster of authors, the traditional publisher may not really be bolstering that author with a whole lot of editorial support. Sometimes they'll get a really dedicated, hands-on, roll up your sleeves editor, but sometimes what they get is someone who's desperately overworked and is supposed to turn an edit around in a matter of weeks and doesn't really have a lot of extra time to hold that author's hand.
100%. I've been that editor too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating for everyone. So that is awesome that you're doing that. Can you tell me a little bit about like what led you to do this work, but editing, why books, and specifically why nonfiction?
Well, like I said, I was a playwright, and I made the decision after I read Pressfield's book, and then I had my baby, and I just said, okay, I want to be with my baby, and I never want to go back to the office because I know I'll just stay there. And so I said, just get paid to write whatever, as long as it's not hurting someone, that the content isn't designed to inflict damage. Just write whatever. And I wrote whatever. I mean, really stuff that is, would sometimes make me blush, stuff that was super boring. And I just cut my teeth because I had no experience at all. And within a short time, I actually got my first book, which was a really short book. And then not too long after that was a prescriptive nonfiction book about relationships.
When you say you got your first book assignment, do you mean as a ghostwriter or as an editor in that case?
I left that part out. That was the first 10 years of my career in publishing, was as a ghost.
Oh, I see. Okay. And let me just loop back for a second, because you just mentioned, before having your baby, you mentioned Pressfield. So for our listeners, let's just recap that story. So Stephen Pressfield, huge hero of mine, author of many books, including The War of Art, which is a slim little powerful Bible for many of us that are in creative professions. And in there, he introduces the concept of resistance as being, the enemy of creativity. And this really struck you. It was a really big deal for you. And you actually wound up meeting Stephen Pressfield in person. Can you tell us about the story and the impact that his work had on you? Like, yes, how it changed you?
I'm hoping he's not going to put a restraining order on me, because I talk about him all the time. I think he won't. He's very nice. But I read the book, immediately signed up. He has this fantastic email list and writing Wednesdays, and I read all of them and toiled away in my fourth floor walk up in Brooklyn and tried really hard. The reason that book really struck me is because I knew about resistance, although from another name. We call it writer's block, which I don't believe in really anymore. Is I understand resistance to be something different. The thing that really slayed me was he said it's a law of the universe, like gravity. That's what got me. And I thought, oh, I'm not supposed to cure it. It's just a thing.
Right.
And once I stopped thinking it was my fault, and I don't know, something was wrong with me, or I couldn't sustain it. Once I was free from that thinking, oh, it's like gravity. Okay, so I just have to deal with it. I just have to figure out and realize it will be back in the morning. That changed everything. So then I set about learning how to manage it.
Amazing. And you weren't even a writer before you met Stephen Pressfield and read that book. You were working at a nonprofit in a different kind of a role. Is that right?
Well, I was a writer. I was a playwright, but playwrights don't make any money. So I was not a writer for hire, not a journalist or an editor. You were, I wrote plays. I had my first gig when I was 17. So I was working really hard at it and making good headway, but that doesn't translate to dollars.
It wasn't how you weren't supporting yourself on your writing. You were working in an office job, and the writing was something you were doing off the side. So after you read his book, and then tell me how it affected your life. What move you made then?
I just made the decision. I thought, okay, just write whatever. And just don't go back to having this hedge job, because as long as you have this other job, you're not going to put yourself to the test of, can you actually make a living doing this? And his book emboldened me, because the only thing that had been holding me back was I couldn't finish stuff, or I couldn't finish it on time. I still have the challenge with finishing things on time.
Same.
But that's more of a, too many projects kind of thing. And also, I think it's kind of writers. I just have to say. I mean, do you agree? I feel like there's a small group of writers who are just ace at deadlines. And then there's everyone else.
Well, I feel like for me, it shows up because I get super enthusiastic about fresh starts and new beginnings. And there's like, oh, the vision is there. And then as soon as I'm kind of like almost at the finish line, my brain is already zooming ahead to the beginning of the next thing. And so I'm not so excited about the cleanup and the tightening and the polishing off and the finishing. So yeah.
Yeah, I get that. But his book helped me to see, okay, this is not a personality flaw, character flaw. So go forth. And so I had no experience writing nonfiction. I wrote a bunch of stuff.
And you quit your job. You went all in on that, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I quit my job. I started it used to be called Elance. It's called Upwork now.
I remember Elance.
And I just wrote, I remember, back in the day. And I wrote a ton of stuff. And it was through Elance that I had my first big prescriptive nonfiction book. Stumbled into it. And then it was through that experience that I realized I had a knack for ghosting because of my playwriting experience. I had such a good ear for patterns, phrasing, rhythm, that I could just do it.
It makes so much sense.
And that I said, oh, I can do that. I just started treating it like one long monologue, but then I didn't really know how to put does this work for the reader part together. So I was on my own figuring that out, which is why I created a methodology. I created a methodology for myself because you're on Elance. You're not going to say, I don't really know how to do this. I'm sorry. You just figure out how to do it. That's just that. And I just got lucky because that person knew a lot of folks. So it wasn't that long after that I started.
So the person who first hired you just made a bunch of referrals and you found new business that way. And that's how your business took off.
Yeah. So I began writing exclusively for personal and professional development for 10 years.
So, well, okay. So I'm going to ask you about your system because that's like the heart of it here. But I want to first ask you like a preliminary question, which is, it's everybody wants to write a book these days, a nonfiction book. It's sort of like the cost of doing business. Like you kind of like have to do it in order to be taken seriously. And at the same time, there's this huge surge in interest in memoir writing. You know, we live in a very confessional media culture, and everyone is documenting their experience, you know, on the internet, through social media, blogs, whatever, et cetera. Do you think that everyone has a book in them? Or
no? No.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay, good. Me too. Me too. Why? Okay, tell me why. Yeah, no, like-minded here. Yeah.
Maybe you have a story or a private diary or journal that you want to explore. It's not that your story doesn't matter. Everybody's story matters. But a book is a very specific way of bringing that story into the world. And it has requirements. It's an art form that can't just be anything you want it to. I mean, it could be anything you want it to be, but it's less effective in getting your message across and moving the reader, et cetera. So it's not just that the story, it's, do you have a message, and are you willing to become an author and learn the craft?
Right.
So no, I don't think everyone has a book in them. I think they might want to.
How can a person self-evaluate? Because I know that a lot of people get stuck even wondering if it's worth their effort to get started, you know, much less see it through. If I'm out there listening to this and I'm wondering which side of the line do I fall on? I have a story. Does it have the qualities that AJ is describing needs to have in order to be a book, to turn into a book? How can we, and maybe you want to answer this in two ways, because memoir or narrative driven nonfiction is very different from practical or information based nonfiction. So let's talk about both of those things. I would love to hear your answers.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you're asking great questions. So I will qualify one. I do always say, if you have the idea for a book, if you have something strong in you that you say, I really want to get this message out, that you have the power to write it, that you can actually execute getting it done. That's different than somebody saying, I think I have a book in me, but I don't know what it is. Oh. That's not true, right? That's just, you want to say you have a book, or you're interested in writing. It's not the same thing as a person who will come to you or to me and say, I know if I could just share this one truth or this process or this framework, or that I think I could help people. That person can execute on it, I really believe, if it comes from that place. If you just have this sort of nebulous idea of authorship, then no. When it comes to nonfiction, how do you determine, okay, this is really important. Prescriptive nonfiction, you've got to have tested what you are putting forth. You can't just say, here's a system and a framework or a set of ideas or a new philosophy, if you haven't tested it with the people that represent your ideal readership.
Mm-hmm. And even worse, if what you're sharing is a regurgitation of other people's methodologies.
For sure.
Because that happens.
Sure. That I actually have this little anecdote in my book. I could have been much longer, but it was one dude who contacted me when I was ghostwriting, and he sent me a spreadsheet with his materials, and it was all it was quotes from other people's books. There's nothing, he had nothing of his own.
Yeah. Not a book.
But I think when it comes to nonfiction, you have to have taken the time to see, okay, what works for me may not work for others in the same way. We all have aptitudes and a level of experience and tolerance for things like self-exploration. Some of us have different set of circumstances. So take the time to test, does what you're saying resonate with folks, or does your process work, or whatever. Even if it's a small test, I think we don't do enough of that. And the beauty of it is, it gives you confidence. It gives you anecdotes and stories. It gives you helps you refine everything. So I think for nonfiction, that's essential for moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But one thing that people get stuck on is they think their idea, they can't do it if someone else has a similar book. So that's not true. There's, as you know, it's your perspective on it that matters. So really it's just, do I know this for sure that this is going to work?
Right. Right. So yeah, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Is this actually effective? And then what about memoirs? Do you work with people who are writing memoir, or is that sort of outside of your bailiwick?
I do, but it's really specific. It's how-to memoir, memoir plus, teaching memoir, message memoir, right? So it's
not the literary memoir, which is a pure like piece of art, and the reason for writing it is creative and artistic primarily.
Yes, correct. So for the people that are writing teaching memoir or how-to or memoir plus, I still think some of the same things apply.
When you say memoir plus, what do you mean?
It's lately, well, that's the term they're using lately for if it also includes a bunch of research. If you just say message memoir, that can be just your thoughts on things and then the stories that support it. But Memoir Plus incorporates research and other people's points of view into the memoir.
Kind of a big idea, like an idea book, but with a personal perspective woven in.
Yeah, with narrative woven into the existing arc.
Yeah. And that is the advice that I have heard on that is that when you are writing a memoir with a message for a particular, like it's important to know who your audience is and why. It can't just be this amazing thing happened to me, or this perhaps not all that exceptional thing happened to me, but it affected me deeply. So I think people have a great difficult time assessing the value of their, the merit of their story versus the merit of their storytelling ability. And that my opinion is that the more heavily the book content, whether it's nonfiction or a narrative, memoir based book, the more heavily it leans into information, the easier it is to put it on a predictable path of success with the right support. And the more heavily it leans into storytelling and literary merit, artistry, the more of a crapshoot it is and the harder it is you can't really, I guess people have ghostwriters for those kinds of books, but that seems weird because the whole value in it is in your own sort of artistic virtuosity.
Okay. You and I can be really good friends. I can tell right now because that was the one thing I would never ghost is any sort of fiction or creative nonfiction.
Right.
That is so deeply personal.
Well, and it feels like paying somebody to pick the painting for you and then passing that work off as your own. And just like, we could have a whole, I don't know if you're into visual arts at all, but I am. And there's a whole movement of conceptual visual artists who literally don't make their own art at all. They employ studio assistants and they just give the concept and the parameters and this is how you should carve that thing out or stack that thing up. And that's kind of like arguably like a different thing. But I think where you're talking about literary art, it just feels like paid plagiarism,
It really is. I'm sorry for anybody who's listening. And I have friends who've done it. I have friends who've written for popular fiction series. And I don't know, man. I just couldn't cross the line. And also because I care about my own voice and I care about my own, that feels like, I never had a problem as a ghost. No one knew. I was a true ghost. I didn't have credit. I even was a ghost with the editors, where the editors didn't even know. So I had this system so they could never find out if it was
wild. You could work for the Pentagon. You're like covering your digital tracks in the metadata. Like this Word document created by, person X.
Yeah. I guess if they wanted to go super spy, they could have found me. But I did have one person once I was at a dinner in Manhattan and for an author I worked with, and the editor was there, and I was kind of nervous because the editor was there, and And then the author just blurted it out. Oh, and this is my ghostwriter, because I can't say anything. The author blurted it, and the editor slammed her fist on the table and said, "I knew it."
I knew it because all of your emails are written like garbage, and here comes your prose, and it's.
But I always had respect for my authors and never felt like this is mine or that this is any sort of plagiarism, because it's really their stories, their concepts, their frameworks, their expertise. But when it's fiction, oh my God, because that's coming from a deep well of creativity of my own.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I do, if you don't mind, I just want to say this one thing about memoir.
Yeah.
I think when I was a playwright, I used to approach every new play starting with character. And I would figure out what part of their life story I wanted to tell. I wouldn't just think about them in the context of a plot. I would figure out who they were and then decide what part I was going to show, even though I knew the whole span of it. And I think I've applied that now to nonfiction, in that I ask authors to think, what is the part of the story, your life story, that fits for the reader in what they're trying to understand or learn, not the whole thing. And I think you can apply that to literary memoir too, which is which part of this is the part that needs to be told versus all of it. And when students in my workshop are primarily working on memoir, I have 3 right now. I still have them go through figuring out their reader, figuring out their core message, their promise, their teaching points. So it helps them filter, which is a problem that memoirists have, is trying to make the choices. So even if you're not following prescription and not doing any how-to or even a direct address to the reader, you can still think about the overall message you want.
I love that. Yeah. That idea about where to set the filter, and that it always comes back to your reader, no matter what kind of book you're writing. It's about where to set the frame, right? These things go inside the frame and these other things go outside the frame. Even if those events or experiences were life-changing for me or super weird or funny or whatever, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't belong in the reader's frame, then it's not going in this book.
Yes. Yeah. And
that's where you say, put it on your blog, turn this into an anecdote that you'll use to promote your book.
Yeah. And it's really helpful to new authors to use a reader focus. It takes practice, but once they get into it, they can use it forevermore for anything they're creating.
So let's talk more about that. I really want to hear more about your framework and your process. And as you said, it all starts with the ideal reader. And I love this tagline on the back of your book, which is a book is not about something, a book is for someone. So talk to me a little bit about the ideal reader and how that is the jumping off point to everything else in the book planning process.
Sure. So, I don't know. People get a little tripped up on this because I think they think of it as a marketing avatar, and it feels scary to make that decision about, I'm writing for soccer moms who drive Range Rovers and, have 5 friends and wish they were married to someone else. Like, that's not what it is. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah. It's not really specific, AJ.
I don't drive a Range Rover and I'm not a soccer mom. So no, it came out of nowhere. Although maybe I know a couple of people like that. We get tripped up on that. That feels overwhelming to make those choices. We're worried about narrowing our audience. We want everybody to read our book because we think it has value. So we get confused using what methodology we're taught to use, which is that avatar methodology when choosing audiences. Because if you're talking prescriptive nonfiction, most people have been educated in how to handle sales and how to think about their clients and so forth. And it trips them up. The thing is, you do need a narrow focus for your reader, but it's not particularly a set of circumstances, although it could be or demographics like that rather. It's hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very simply put, the thing they want and what they perceive is standing in the way. That's it. The thing they want and what they perceive is standing in the way. And that second part is where people also get tripped up, because they usually don't know what their reader thinks is standing in the way.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is if we decide what's standing in the way, and then now the reader doesn't connect to the content because they think it's this other thing.
Oh, absolutely. Or I think the other place that people fall into a gap is where they're just sharing the information without thinking of the gap of understanding that the reader has to cross. So they're just standing there in the future state, talking about the future state, or the, you know, the world as it should be with their information, but without remembering that the person who's coming to that is not there yet. They're in a place of pain and lack and loss and confusion that comes before. So how to meet them where they are and guide them across.
Yeah. They probably have a whole bunch of myths that you need to bust. They probably need to be let off the hook so they don't feel like things are their fault. There's a whole lot of stuff. You kind of have to get them to a baseline before you can move them forward. And if you don't know where they are to start with, then you can't really address it. And then that ends up feeling like a book that has good ideas, but didn't really resonate. So when you see people leave an Amazon review and it says, I liked it, but, you know, it wasn't what I was hoping it to be. Reading between the lines means I wanted this book to be the one, but I just didn't connect with it. And I think a reader will give you a lot of leeway to get where you want to go if they feel seen by you. And most people don't take the time to really understand what's going on in hearts and minds. They're more worried about people in their 50s who live in Arkansas or whatever it is. And that doesn't matter. You could have that soccer mom and bass player in New York and a CEO who all have the same thing they want and perceive the obstacles in the same way.
Right. So it's not a demographic thing that ties them together. It is, as you say, the hearts and minds, the place where they're at. That makes so much sense.
Sometimes it does matter, gender, or, you know, I'm thinking of one student I have. She specifically wrote a book for moms.
Yeah. Sometimes demographics are part of the filter. Like I'm thinking of, you know, there was a guide to, what's it called? The book I was looking at in the bookstore the other day. Not for me, looking for a friend, but it was called, I think it's called Getting It. And it's a guide to kind of a healthy hookup culture, or healthy hookups. It's like a guide to sort of like, you know, but it's clearly, I was just looking at it from a positioning perspective. And it's clearly written for like a younger reader, you know, like I don't mean children. I mean, like, you know, younger than me. I'm a Generation Xer all the way through.
Me too. But, Gen X. Hello.
But you know, sort of like for a young millennial into sort of Gen Z sort of, and that's where demographics matter. If you know you're talking to someone at a particular stage of life or who's in a cultural group, the place where that really matters is not just in the information that you share, but also the vernacular that you use and really understand and being able to connect. But then there are other books that, you know, where people are talking about something that could affect you at any stage of life. And then you need to, or any, you know, whatever your background. And then you need to really understand, well, I suppose regardless, you also need to understand this kind of conceptual shift that the reader is going to make, the journey of transformation that your book takes them on. You have another key concept called the core message. Tell us about the core message.
Sure. Well, I mean, lots of people use that term. So I'm not the first to use it for sure. And, but I think of it differently. So it's the foundational truth on which your whole book is built. And here's the thing.
Them's big words.
Yeah. Everything hinges on it. So you actually shared mine earlier when you read the back of my book, which is a book is not about something, a book is for something. Or in Mike Michalowicz's probably best-selling book, Profit First, it would be traditional accounting methods are killing your business. Take your profit first. If you get this one thing, then you can get the rest of the things. If you, that's it. So people get mixed up with it. They think it's an elevator pitch. They think it's a promise. They think it has to be clever. They think it has to be show how smart they are. They want it to sound sexy and cool, but in the meantime, they don't really have the truth there. It has to be that thing that is the main mindset shift. And it also, this is the part that's hard, needs to be transformational on its own. When you get it, it's amazing what happens. So a person can hear it, never read your book, never talk to you, and still start to make a change. Maybe not the whole change, but they can look at things differently. And that's the kind of message that people lean in for. Tell me more, tell me everything. And it's also the kind of message that people remember and share with others. And so we're back to, is this book helping us raise our level of thought leadership, et cetera? So having a message like that is critical. And then, of course, once you've got it, you can write the whole book around it. You can pitch it to agents and publishers, and you have better ability and more confidence in marketing it.
Absolutely. And so you said that the core message is not quite the same thing as the promise. And that's another key element in your process. So talk to me about how is it different from what's a promise in that case?
The promise is slightly different as well. And this comes from, honestly, it comes from years in personal and professional development, a lot of self-help, where it felt that the author wasn't being honest about the promise. And it's one of the reasons that I left that part of the industry, because I didn't feel in personal integrity for myself to be part of that machine. I think they have these beautiful promises, but it's not really attainable for the average person. And they haven't really put it to that test of, well, okay, how can I promise that? And then, okay, if I am going to promise that, what do I have to do to make sure that I can actually deliver on it? So a promise is something that A, your reader wants. So that's number one. And B, that you can deliver by the time they turn the last page. Not 5 years from now, not on a wing and a prayer, but not if the stars align, but really they're going to turn the last page and something's different. And when you put yourself to that test, it changes the book.
Well, that's hard.
Yeah.
And it should be, because
should be.
Yeah.
And then, but then things open up. It's so great. Okay, well, wait a minute. How am I going to get them there? Okay. What do you think about this? And, you have two choices. You can either rise to that occasion or you can also modify it. There's nothing bad about lowering the expectation and taking the promise down a notch so that you're actually delivering on it. But it then changes the way you outline. It changes the content. It changes the whole shape of everything when you make yourself deliver on that promise. It's a game changer.
Aim for the moon and hit the moon instead of aiming for the stars to hit the moon.
Yes. Yes. Because if you can provide a reader with change, it actually happens. I mean, look at me and Steven Pressfield. I don't even know how many books I've sold for that dude. I don't think that he needs me to do it, but I would bet it's in the thousands at this point.
Right. And for every AJ there is like shilling for Steven Pressfield, there's 1,000 other AJs shilling for Steven Pressfield too, because that's the word of mouth wildfire, right? I mean, like so many champions and advocates of his book because it really is so effective. The book that comes to mind for me this year, that I read earlier this year is Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. And have you read that book yet?
No, did you love it?
Girl, you have to read it. You have to read it. You have to read it. Everybody should read it. And I recommend, I don't always, but I recommend the audiobook edition for the reason
Okay.
that she has such a way of like crawling inside your ear into your brain. She narrates her book herself, which is not always the right thing to do, but but that book really had a transformational effect on my life and caused me to forever think differently about the path that I'm on. Yeah. So The Way of Integrity, Martha Beck. Oh my gosh.
Okay, that's a huge review and testimony, and I'm gonna go on Audible when we're done here. Actually, I have
All
my
right.
Audible up. So.
It's
But see, that's how it works. You meet that that helped you.
Yes. And I have told literally dozens of people, and then actually 2 weeks ago, I was in a call with my financial advisor, and she said to me, I read this book this year. Have you heard of Martha Beck? I read this book called The Way of Integrity. And we were like, and it was like we were in some secret club. And it's like, yes, I know. Oh, you're one too. And there was just all of this bonding that happened around this author's words and knowledge. And again, getting back to what you were saying about the promise, I'm not even sure I could identify the promise articulated in her book. I mean, but it seeps in through the cover copy. It seeps in through through the title, subtitle, the table of contents. You kind of know how you will be different after reading this book, and that's what inspires you to go on that journey. So, yeah, as an author, you absolutely need to know what it is your readers are going to, kind of snap you up for.
Yeah, and I'm going to get it, and I'm going to try and find what I think the promise is, and I'll email you once.
Okay, good. We can put it in the show notes. But let's talk for the rest of our time together. We have another 15 more minutes left, and to hit the 60-minute mark. I do like to be consistent and on time, so I want to hear what it was like for you turning the tables on yourself and being your own client, I guess, and writing this book for yourself. Was it you put yourself through your own paces when it came time to write your own book? Presumably you must have asked yourself, who is my ideal reader? What's my core message? What's my promise? Was it harder or easier than ghostwriting other people's books, and how?
The first getting into it was harder, and that's because I had really lost my voice over all those years of ghostwriting. And I still write with Mike Michalowicz, who's more of a writing collaborator and partner now. So I'm used to doing Mike's voice, which, if you know his books, is like Jersey, little bit of a dude bro, but a total gentleman, your best friend who like meets you for a beer at Applebee's and tells you everything is going to be cool. He is the real deal. That's him. He's such a man of integrity, meaning integrity again. But I'm used to doing his voice. I could do it in my sleep. And it took me a minute. I really did, to get back to me. That part was hard. And I just had to keep sludge and a lot of writing in the margins. This is pure crap, as I would write.
That doesn't sound very encouraging. Do you advise people to call themselves names in the margins?
No, but I'm cool with it because I let it out that way.
Yeah.
I just get it out. Then it's not staying with me for the day. Delete. It's okay. I mean, I've been edited and critiqued for 30 years, so it's cool. It's no problem.
And so the question of voice was my big question for you about that, because as an editor, I've done a fair bit of, I haven't ever ghostwritten somebody's book from scratch, but I have rewritten every word of other people's manuscripts.
You're an editor, and you've done plenty of ghostwriting.
A lot of like book doctoring, right? Never sitting down from square one and kind of pulling all of that together. But I know what it is to slip into the slipstream of somebody else's voice, and how different it feels to stand out there on your own and say, this is me, this is my sense of humor, this is my perspective, this is my vernacular, this is who I am and how I sound. And it can be difficult it can feel very revealing after you're used to kind of like working behind the scenes. So, especially because you're not just an editor, but a ghostwriter. How did it feel? What about the kind of like, coming out part of it, where you're like, hey, hi, it's me. Anybody want to buy my book? Here's who I am. Like, how did it feel to put yourself out there in public?
Well, it was terrifying, quite honestly. I'm really good at being behind the scenes, and I had to make myself come out from behind the scenes to do my workshops, but that was still a small group of people. So this was really scary for me, honestly. And it was a test. It was a test to my own tolerance level. So I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to get the word out as much as I can, but I'm naturally don't want to be in front of anything. But I'm here today talking to you, and I'll keep banging the drum. And part of that is something that, since we mentioned Mike, he said to me, you have to get out there. You have to, because you need more people will be helped because they get this message. And I did write the book for that reason. I actually had no interest in writing a book to do any of the things that everybody else wants to write a book who comes to me. I'm not a speaker. I'm not trying to raise my speaking fees. I'm happy with my students. I just felt that I didn't want what I knew could help folks to be stuck in my workshop. I wanted it to be available to people, even if they couldn't afford $27 and they could go get it from the library. So that's what keeps me banging the drum, is to just give people a way forward who do want to write a better book, but they aren't really sure that they're capable of it. And this is a good start.
That's a great reason. And I always, when I'm asking people, why do you want to write this book, is the first question that we always start with. And I force them to answer that question two different ways, because I think that there are two different kinds of answers and everybody has one of each or some of each. There's your altruistic reasons, your impact reasons. I want to do this to change people's lives and because they just need to know. And then there are this podcast is called The Selfish Gift. So I'm just going to stand, shamelessly in the light of that word. There are the selfish reasons. There are the self-serving reasons. Let's soften it a little bit that way. Okay. So you're not a speaker, but what do you hope? Presumably there must be something that you hope this book will do for you.
Honestly, it's this is okay. So, first of all, I have become a speaker out of necessity because of this situation, but I wasn't one day. I just have to do it now to support this book. But I'm trying to flip the tables on the industry because I'm really tired of everybody telling people that they can get a book done in 5 days. I think it's damaging. I think there's a lot of people who believe it and don't understand all the asterisks that come with that, because you could do that, but then all these other things you want aren't going to happen. And I think it's cruel, actually, to take a person's dreams, run them through the McDonald's drive-through, and then tell them, here, you can have the dream now. And I also think that it underestimates people and their abilities. Not everybody has great writing talent, but by focusing on the reader, you can actually write a better book. So it's a way forward. That's why I want to sell, just sorry for cursing, but an ass ton of books.
Yeah, man.
So that's because I want it to be sort of like before AJ wrote Write a Must Read and after AJ wrote Write a Must Read. And I know that sounds grandiose, but
I love it. And actually, here's what it sounds like. It sounds like this is different even from just like the impact that you want to have on this reader and the change you want to make in their lives. It's a bigger vision. And I guess the way I would characterize that is that, if we're again getting back to what's in it for you, it sounds like there's an activist mission behind that. Yes. That you're approaching this topic from the perspective of an activist who deeply cares about seeing a sea change in the population so that you can sleep at night. So you can feel better about the world we live in. And I share that with you, by the way, so much. It bugs me to no end to see. For me, it's all those things that you said. Yes, the dumbing down or dimming of people's vision and dreams, and the sort of predatory nature of a lot of these snake oil salesmen. I also think that it's lowering the tone of our public conversation and educating. I guess like kind of lowering reader expectations and therefore the dumbing down of society. Not that there aren't still amazing books being written, but when you just look at the sheer volume of shitty books that are hitting the market they're shitty, but just not because there's something like chronically wrong with the author, but because they're just underdeveloped and have not been properly developed. Enough people read those books and they forget really what good writing is. They forget what a well-articulated idea should sound like. And I feel like that's just the erosion of our collective intelligence.
Well, I think if we're ever in the same city, that we immediately have to have some sort of drink together or coffee or something, because one of the perks of writing this book is I've been finding some kindred spirits that I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to see that, because I believe people can learn how to write great books. Maybe not it's not, I'm not saying you're going to win the Pulitzer. It's going to be the book you want it to be and do the job you want it to do. And we have to stop telling people that they don't deserve to take the time they need to get that book where it needs to be.
Love it. So what sort of support, speaking of taking the time, what sort of support did you need to get this done? How much time did you put into it, the writing and editing? Did you have an editor that you paid? Tell me about the infrastructure that existed around you to help you get this done.
Well, I chose to not go the traditional route because I wanted more control over the intellectual property afterward for business reasons. And I wanted 100% of my digital royalties. So that's why I made that choice. So
you were with a hybrid publisher.
With Page Two. I chose that. I don't know that I will do that again for my next book, but for this book, it made perfect sense. So they have a team of editors that are all veterans of traditional. So that spoke to me. So it's the same process. And so I had that support, but it took me a long time to finish the book because I had a lot of personal challenges. It was during lockdown, and, my wife almost died from COVID and is a long hauler. We had a lot of other issues. And so the book was very late, and it was hard for me because there were a lot of expectations.
Yeah.
But we push on and we just keep writing a few words a day, and eventually it's a book.
So what did your writing practice look like?
Well, I try to follow my own advice about writing sprints in community. I get up early in the morning and I write with a group on Zoom. And I also do that to support my authors throughout the week. So I'd write during those times. But because of the personal challenges, a lot of my book was written in a hospital, emergency rooms, hospital rooms, waiting rooms.
Like on a phone or on an iPad or what?
I just if I knew we had to go to the hospital, I just put my laptop in the bag.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of it was written there. Because
Wow.
you just keep going and you try to get a little bit done here and a little bit done there. And there's no perfect circumstance. We all want to have a lovely retreat in Ireland for a month and write our book, but most of us would just sleep the whole time and, go to the pub and get a rest. So you have to start thinking about the book in terms of, can I get just a few words in just to keep the dream alive, just to keep the vision alive, and to keep the book top of mind. So you can keep tinkering. I actually have my notes app is just full of also little notes I would have here and there. Don't forget to do this, write about that. And then I just, went through the notes app and would hit everything I could think of whenever I had a spare 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So, it was an arduous process just because of personal challenges, but a lot of people have those.
Yep. Yeah. No, I love your, your example of just the example you set of just how to find that kind of like lost time and make the most of it, sitting in a hospital room, or, in a waiting room somewhere, and making fruitful use of that time. I hope that your wife is okay now.
Much better. She's never going to be 100%, or we don't know. Long haulers, they don't actually have answers, but she's doing great. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
And what have you learned from writing this book that has changed the way you support authors?
Oh, I have so much more. I had compassion for them before. I love them so much, but I really do now. That it's hard. There wasn't as much at stake for me when I was a ghost. By the time a book came out, I had already written, 7 more.
Oh my God. You're too prolific.
I didn't feel that way. It felt like I was always late all the time. So, but, I have so much compassion for the emotions you go through to try and get that book out the door. And it's such a roller coaster. And I knew it from a writing perspective, but I didn't know it from putting yourself out there perspective, because I was always behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just have so much love for them even more now for how courageous they are.
Awesome. Well, AJ, you're so inspiring. And I love, like you said, I love meeting kindred spirit on this kind of like road, this journey that we're on, upholding, our sort of intellectual standards and creative potential, and all of the rest that comes from, this is why we love books. It's why we love publishing. And so I'm deeply grateful to you for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a total blast.
Awesome. I really hope this conversation has inspired you to give so much of your gift to the world that it expands you into your greatest possible version of yourself. Remember, it's not selfish just because we also benefit from it. And here's where I get to make a selfish request. New podcasts need all the help they can get. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and subscribe to us on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @selfishgiftpodcast. And send me a DM. I'd love to hear how you're sharing your gift with the world.